What I have drawn here is a muscle fiber and a myofibril and a little bit of the neuromuscular junction. So this big arrow coming down from the top is a motor neuron. And of course, this motor neuron punctures the endomysium and it meets up with the muscle fiber without really touching it in an area that we know is called the neuromuscular junction. And that's what this is right here. This junctional folds, this that I'm outlining in black right here is the sarcolemma, and that's a fancy name for the cell membrane of one muscle fiber. So sarcolemma, which is just fancy name of the cell membrane of one muscle fiber, which is what we call a muscle cell. This structure right here, this is one myofibril, which is a cylinder-shaped protein. And we know that there are many of these cylinder-shaped proteins within a cell. In fact, they're the greatest component within a cell, so much so that nuclei and even mitochondria are kind of pushed to the side as though they're not all that important, but they are. There are some other structures that I can poorly draw, poorly. These are structures that are common to a muscle fiber. So before we dig into the myofibril, let's do these structures. Now, there is this like honeycomb type membrane. It's like a membrane of tubules that kind of runs throughout the muscle fiber, and there's these tubules that stick up kind of off of the sarcolemma. I don't know, think of a crown as to how it surrounds the sarcolemma on the outside, but on the inside, what it does is it forms a big network of cross-cutting tubules. Sorry, of cross-cutting tubules. And what these are called, so it's like a series of interconnected tunnels. These are called transverse or T tubules. And let's just call them an interconnected network of tubes right now. So they poke out of the sarcolemma and they are internal structures to a muscle fiber. There are also these other structures that kind of cover proteins, and it's like this web-like structure that covers a protein. So it would have this wavy type structure to it. And what they do is they get really wide where they connect to the transverse tubules. Actually, they don't connect. So where they come close to the transverse tubules, they have this big wide open part to them. This is what is called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And again, these are structures that are beyond my individual ability to draw. So the sarcoplasmic reticulum is T-I-C-U-L-U-M is a web-like structure that surrounds a myofibril, and its big job is to store calcium. Now, your book and every other book always talks about this structure right here, which they call a triad. All that is the butt end of a sarcoplasmic reticulum and the transverse tubule itself. And the butt end of a sarcoplasmic reticulum, as if we couldn't make this any more complicated, is called a terminal cisterna. Terminal meaning end, cisterna means basin. So a terminal cisterna, a transverse tubule, and then another terminal cisterna is what your book refers to as a triad. Okay, let's look at this myofibril right here. Number one, the first thing we see are these Z-shaped structures right here, and there's two of them, and these are called Z discs, probably because that's what they look like. Also, we see these three lines in the center, and this is what is called an M line, most likely for middle line, because the structures contained from disc to disc are called a sarcomere. And it's the structures in this very, very tiny unit of one myofibril. It's these structures that actually perform a contraction. So let's not forget that this is one myofibril, which is a protein within a muscle cell. And take a look, there are more of these sarcomeres. In fact, if we were to look at one myofibril, we would see tons of these Z discs lined up back to back. And that would be sarcomeres lined up back to back. There are other proteins in here. These proteins right here that kind of look like a tree branch laying on its side. And here's another one right here. So again, like a tree branch laying on its side. This is what is called myosin. And we refer to this as the thick filament, or the thick myofilament, or the thick fiber. In our class, we're going to refer to it as myosin, because different book, sometimes they call it something different. These lines right here, even though I've drawn them with the same thickness, maybe by mistake, I'm not too sure, these are what are called actin. This is the actin myofiber, the actin filament, and it's just an arrangement of proteins. So myosin and actin together are linked through another protein fiber that we've seen before. And what I'm drawing in green here is elastin. So these are the three types of protein fibers that come together in a very specific arrangement to make a sarcomere. Now, when these contract, they will pull on the sarcolemma, which will then contract, which will pull on the endomysium, which will pull on the paramysium, which will pull on the epimysium, which will then pull the tendon connected to the bone, creating the action of movement. So it's this tiny sarcomere. Thousands are in one myofibril. There are hundreds of myofibrils in one muscle fiber, and we could keep going. So just so you understand the enormity of sarcomeres that work for you to make a contraction.